I want to share one of the wildest experiences of my life, my divorce. To say it was full of drama would be an understatement. Let me start by giving you some background. I met my ex-wife about 7 years ago. We dated for 2 years before getting married. At the time, I truly believed we had something special, and I was all in. I was working in real estate sales, not anything glamorous, but enough to cover my bills and enjoy a few luxuries now and then. My ex, on the other hand, worked part-time at a local boutique. After our wedding, however, she decided to take a break from work and find herself. I tried to be supportive, thinking she'd figure out her path eventually. At first, everything seemed fine. We moved into a small house that I had bought on my own before we got married. My father co-signed a loan to help me get a better interest rate, but all the payments came from me. My parents liked her. She would spend time with my mother, chatting about clothes and gossip, and with my father, discussing sports during the big games. She was friendly and outgoing. My sister, who's a couple of years younger than me, was more cautious. She once told me that my ex-wife seemed too focused on what she could gain from the relationship, but I shrugged it off. I was in love and believed we were a solid team. But as time passed, things began to change. She started staying out late, saying she needed space or was hanging out with friends I'd never heard of. She'd come back in the early hours of the morning, acting like I was overreacting for asking simple questions. I tried to give her space, thinking maybe she was feeling stuck at home since she wasn't working, but my gut told me something was off. My sister noticed too. She said that whenever my ex visited, she seemed distant, like her mind was elsewhere. One night, my ex came home at 2 a.m. I was up in the living room, worried and feeling sick. The moment she walked in, she looked surprised to see me awake. I asked where she had been, and she instantly got defensive, shouting that I was being controlling and paranoid. She stormed into our bedroom, slammed the door, and left me sitting there, utterly confused. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened, never apologizing or offering any explanation. It was as if I was just supposed to forget it. The suspicion ate at me, and one day, I saw her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I know it's wrong to snoop, but at that point, I couldn't resist. What I found made it clear. She was texting another guy in a way that went far beyond just friendship. The texts were explicit enough to completely erase any remaining doubt. My heart sank. When I confronted her, she turned the tables, accusing me of invading her privacy. But deep down, I knew our relationship was finished. That night, we had an explosive argument. She accused me of never supporting her dreams, which seemed ridiculous since she never even told me what those dreams were. She said she felt suffocated, even though I had essentially given her freedom. I told her she was betraying me, and she didn't even deny it. In a fit of anger, she left the house. I remember sitting at the dining table, staring at the walls, realizing how quickly our relationship had gone from bliss to chaos. The following weeks were tense. She stayed out later and later, sometimes not returning until morning. We barely spoke. My father noticed my mood and invited me over for dinner without her. That night, my family surrounded me, telling me I deserved better and that I shouldn't let her walk all over me. They advised me to prepare for the possibility that our marriage was beyond repair. It hurt, but I knew they were right. Not long after, I found out she had actually moved in with the guy she had been texting point one afternoon. I came home early, hoping we could have a calm conversation. But when I walked in, I found her packing her clothes while talking to someone on the phone, telling them to make room for her in their closet. My anger flared up instantly, but oddly enough, I also felt a sense of relief. At least I knew the truth now. I told her to take whatever she needed and leave. She gave me a look that mixed pity and annoyance before walking out. That marked the beginning of the official divorce process, and it turned into an absolute nightmare. She quickly hired a lawyer, a tough one at that. We had to go through the usual procedures in my state, with a waiting period and mandatory mediation sessions to try to settle things. But there was no way I was going to give in to the demands she was making. She wanted half of everything, half of the house, half of my savings, even half of my car's value. It felt like she was trying to drain me dry, and her new boyfriend was right there, smirking like they had already won the jackpot. My parents were furious, but they reminded me not to do anything impulsive. My sister, however, was all for going after them full force in court. I found myself torn between the two approaches. One part of me wanted revenge, while the other part wanted to remain calm and logical. My lawyer advised me to keep my emotions in check and stick to the facts, so that's exactly what I did. I gathered every receipt, every bank statement, and every document showing that I bought the house before we were married. I made sure I had proof that she never contributed a dime to the mortgage or bills. She had basically coasted on my income. The good news was that under state law, anything acquired before marriage stays yours, as long as you don't mix it with joint assets. I had been diligent about keeping everything separate. My lawyer said we had a strong case, but every time we went to mediation, it was pure torture. She would act all sweet and vulnerable in front of the mediator, claiming she had no idea what to do now and how she'd sacrifice her career for our home life. Funny how she conveniently forgot that she had quit her job on her own, and now she was living with another guy. Her boyfriend didn't make it any easier, often whispering things about how I'd soon be funding their dream home. His arrogance was beyond belief. Finally, we reached the last step, the day in court where the judge would make the final decisions. Right before that, I received a message from her boyfriend on social media. He taunted me, saying I'd be left with nothing, calling me a sucker and thanking me for setting them up. I screenshot the message and sent it to my lawyer, but didn't respond to him directly. I blocked him and moved on, knowing that losing my composure could hurt me in court. The night before the hearing, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep and pace around the house, replaying all the possible outcomes. I had nightmares about losing everything I'd worked so hard for, my house, my savings, everything. My father offered to drive me to the courthouse the next morning, and I gladly accepted. It felt good to have someone by my side for support. When we arrived at the courthouse, I saw my ex-wife and her boyfriend standing in the hallway, laughing like they were about to watch a comedy show. My lawyer met me with a firm handshake, and we went inside together. The judge was no nonsense, which I found reassuring. My lawyer laid out our evidence, showing the timeline of when I purchased the house, the bank statements proving I funded everything, and the text where she admitted she hadn't contributed. Her lawyer tried to paint a sob story, claiming she gave up her ambitions for our family life, but it didn't hold up to the facts. Then my lawyer presented the bombshell. Text messages showing she was already with her new boyfriend before she moved out. The judge started asking her direct questions about when the affair began and whether she had informed me about wanting a divorce first. She stumbled over her answers, and it became painfully obvious that she had been lying about the entire timeline. I could see a subtle shift in the judge's expression, one that made it clear things weren't going in her favor anymore at that point. The judge flipped through a few documents, took a brief pause, and then asked if I had anything else to add. My lawyer reiterated that while we understood some minimal spousal support could be expected due to her unemployment, it should not come anywhere near the amount she was demanding, especially considering the short duration of our marriage and her lack of financial contribution. The judge nodded thoughtfully and said he needed a short break to finalize his decision. As we left the courtroom, I saw my ex-wife and her boyfriend huddled off to the side, whispering. I caught part of his muttered words. "Don't worry, babe, we've got this." The comment made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably just 15 minutes, we were called back in. My heart was pounding as the judge began. He went over the details, how short the marriage was, how I had bought the house before we were married, and the clear evidence that she had contributed little, either financially or domestically. Then he dropped the bombshell. She wasn't going to get the 50% or more she had been asking for. Instead, she would receive a modest settlement to help her get back on her feet, along with short-term spousal support that would end quickly, especially since she was already living with her boyfriend. The judge essentially pointed out that she had another source of financial support, so she wasn't exactly helpless. The look on their faces was priceless. My ex's jaw almost hit the floor, and her boyfriend lost the smug grin he had been wearing. She tried to protest, and her lawyer even asked if the judge would reconsider. But the judge firmly shut that down with a simple, "No, this is final." My lawyer flashed me a small smile, and for the first time in a while, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Justice was actually on my side. When the session ended, we all stood up. My ex-wife rushed over to me, muttering that I wouldn't get away with this. I calmly told her that the judge made his decision based on the facts, and she needed to accept it. Her boyfriend looked like he wanted to pick a fight, but my father stepped in between us. The boyfriend quietly called me a loser, to which I responded, "You're the one who lost today. Deal with it." He turned bright red and stormed off with her. Outside the courtroom, my father pulled me into a hug. My mother and sister were eagerly awaiting the news back home. My lawyer shook my hand and said this was one of those rare cases where everything lined up in favor of the person who had been honest. We left the courthouse, and my father made a joke about grabbing a drink. Of course, I was all in. On the ride home, I called my mother and sister. They were ecstatic. My sister was practically yelling about how amazing it felt to see those two finally get put in their place. I was buzzing with so much adrenaline. It felt like I had just won a championship. A few days later, I heard from mutual acquaintances that my ex-wife was furious and convinced the judge had been biased. Her boyfriend was apparently complaining about how unfair the system was. Funny, considering they had both thought they would walk away with my money on a silver platter. They had been telling people about their big plans to invest once the divorce was finalized. Looks like they were counting their chickens before they hatched. Now, they were left with almost nothing. I won't lie. It felt incredibly satisfying to see them face the consequences of their sense of entitlement. They had assumed the court would just hand them everything I had worked for, but the law sided with the truth. People often think the ex-wife always walks away with a huge payout in divorce, but it doesn't always go that way, especially when she's the one who walked out and contributed so little after the dust settled. I focused on rebuilding my life. I spent more time with friends, started guitar lessons, something I'd been putting off for ages, and hit the gym more regularly. My parents began inviting me over for dinner more often, which felt comforting. My sister, ever the optimist, kept suggesting I go on a vacation to clear my head. Maybe I'll do that someday, but for now, I'm just relieved to be free from that toxic relationship. Looking back, I wish I'd noticed the warning signs sooner, but I suppose some lessons can only be learned the hard way. I gave my ex everything I could, but it was never enough for her. She wanted to control my assets and to flaunt her new relationship in my face. It felt like I was dealing with a completely different person than the woman I married. But after witnessing her breakdown in court and seeing the tears she struggled to hold back when the judge handed down the minimal settlement, I realized I was truly free. The settlement I ended up paying was a fraction of what she demanded. The judge set an expiration date on it, considering how short our marriage was and the fact she was living with her boyfriend. She received a few months of support, essentially a get-on-your-feet gesture from the legal system. Honestly, it felt like a small price to pay to rid myself of that nightmare. Word around town is that she and her boyfriend are facing money troubles now. They probably thought they'd be living it up with my hard-earned money, but that plan came to a screeching halt. Honestly, I don't lose any sleep over it. They made their bed. Now they can lie in it. That's how my divorce went. From a complete disaster to one of the most satisfying moments of my life. My ex and her boyfriend actually laughed at me in front of the judge, convinced they were about to hit the jackpot. But the judge reviewed the facts and made a final ruling that left them both speechless. The moral of the story: keep good records, stand up for yourself, and don't let entitled people steamroll you. Sometimes, life gives you the sweet payoff you deserve. Watching their faces when they realized they were getting far less than they hoped for, That alone made everything I went through worth it. Overall, I'm doing great now. I've got my house, my savings, and a fresh start. Sure, I've got a few scars from the experience, but I'd rather have those than be stuck in that disastrous marriage for even a second longer. My dad still jokes about how I dodged a bullet, and my mom says she's never been prouder of how I stood my ground. My sister cracks jokes about me writing a book someday. Maybe I will. But for now, I just wanted to share this story here, hoping it helps someone else realize they don't have to let anyone take advantage of them. If you're in a similar situation, hang in there, gather your proof, trust the process, and remember that sometimes the best revenge is seeing your ex and their new partner realize they didn't walk away with the windfall they thought they would. Thanks for reading if you made it this far. It's been one wild ride, but I'm finally off it, and life is so much better on solid ground.